G'day guys, welcome to Ben's World on Postman Productions, which you can find simply by googling Postman Productions, Ben's World. You should find my website or my YouTube pages. You can also find, I have a social media page out there, so feel free to, set it public, so feel free to read that as well. I use it as an open work diary, so it's not, everything I put in paper or in a book or whatever, that's what I proof off and sign off and so on, perfect. But my social media page is my work diary, so it's there for references only, and I do ask anybody that takes anything off it to bear it with the murder of the English language, and of course check anything I put there, because at the end of the day nobody is infallible. Which is kind of where I'm going to start with tonight, which I'm going to be looking at the situation with the way that the media has handled the situation, saying that where the origins of the virus are. Now, it's quite an interesting sort of situation, because there's a real double standard going on here. And the first thing they turn around and say is, whenever someone suggests that it came out of the laboratory in Wuhan or was man-made, it gets shot down in a shower of no, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. All the fact checkers, all the snow checkers, they all basically pour scorn on that particular area, which we'll get into in a second. But it's quite interesting, because the double standard here is that they keep saying that the virus actually originated out of a laboratory in Wuhan, out of the seafood market in Wuhan. But what I find quite interesting about this is that that's actually been really proved wrong. I mean, it was carried out at the BBC. It's been carried out in several Asian newspapers. It's been carried out in the Guardian, which what they basically say is the etymology of the virus in terms of the origin and coming from seafood doesn't actually match that. And one of the things, as I say, that it sort of came from this basically of this idea of this bat and kind of like an anteater, a Patagonia, or however you pronounce it. Their strain of various bits and pieces have both managed to come together in this virus, which has managed to make it Wuhan, and have originated the bat to a place 600 miles away, and yet they have no explanation of how that got from there to the market in Wuhan without showing up anywhere else, or explaining the various factors about how it is that the bat or the Patagonian came together, and they have no subject zero. And then you also have the situation when you actually look at when the date of the disease actually broke out, which was late December in China. We now have cases that we know of, at least in France, where the disease also broke out in late December. So when you actually work out about in terms of the incubation area, how long it takes for that virus to actually kind of be in your system and then actually come out of your system, sort of saying that it could have managed in the market one day, in France the next. Short version, and I'll put all the links and bits and pieces there, and you can check the sources yourself, and please do. I mean, this is really important stuff, and this is the frustration I'm getting, where this double standard, where people saying, well, no, people don't check the facts and false stuff on Facebook, and yet when you present them an alternative viewpoint, they don't want to go and check those facts either. So really, it's actually they're guilty of the same crime which they're accusing people who come up with this particular alternative viewpoint. And now I say alternative viewpoint because I actually haven't said that the origin of it came from a man-made situation, and that it's necessarily tied up with any conspiracy or any game. And we'll get into those facts again, but the point is, this is alternative A, and then we get into alternative B, which doesn't have any science behind it whatsoever. It is a theory, and it's no more or no less of a theory than the lab situation. And it's where it's really interesting, when I find, as you get into start looking into it, this is what I find interesting, is you get things like I'm looking at here, and again I put the links there. We've got, for example, James Leduc of Galveston, Texas, is one of the guys that you'll find quite very commonly shooting down this theory. Nobody in the media has actually turned around and pointed out James Galveston's connections to the laboratory in Wuhan, and specifically to the Shady, I think is the particular word. We'll just check that in a second. Again, I put all these names and stuff on the spelling and so on the website that this WebTube comes. So if I don't pronounce it, it's there. to check and cross-reference for you, and I'll hammer that point home. Everything I put up there actually can be checked and verified, but that James actually has a personal connection with this woman, Shady. We then turn around and we have, and of course the other thing is that when we look at all the links that you look at in terms of Galveston, Texas, is, we have FBI missing wire weapons, Galveston 2013, Galveston racist concern, the New York Times, FBI missing weapons, Galveston 2003. Then we've got guys like Robert Boyle, who's, he's a Harvard University lecturer. I've interviewed previously related to the Ebola subject, which we'll get to in a second as well. He's basically pouring score on the Galveston National Laboratory. So then you've got, guys like Gary Roberts. So Gary Roberts, again, is an interesting guy because on my particular Facebook page, there's a post there where Snopes is saying, conspiracy theorists linked Gary Robertson himself to Ebola in Africa. Never actually happened, and there was no defence connections. Well, not only has Gary Robertson again got several connections to the Wuhan laboratory, but when you go and actually look at my links and the research, and you find that well, actually the Tulane University, which he was a part of, actually was carrying out research into the issue of Ebola and a whole different variety of diseases, but specifically the date is a very important part, in 2006, prior to the outbreak of the Ebola, and it was being carried out by the Department of Defense. I've managed to kind of go really do a big deep dive on that particular one, and I've had to go look really hard from all different sources to piece all the information together to verify that's the case, because what's really interesting in that one is it's like time after time after time when you go to Tulane University, you actually find articles or reference pieces which, are the ones I'm looking for, which have been named in other articles. You go to them, hit the link, it's 404, that link's been dissed. I mean, it's very clear to me that someone's gone to a great deal of difference to scrub that actually off the radar. So again, in the written material, and we might even go, we'll probably do a post on the African Ebola section later on, because again, this is a story which I did a lot of research on previously when it broke out in around about 2017. I interviewed Francis Boyle, who's the bioweapons specialist at Harvard University, and we got into the very reason why back then the epidemiology of the bats and Ebola was absolutely ridiculous, as it is proven to be here, and very similar crossovers and narratives used again and again. In the Ebola case, off the top of my mind, one of the cool factors was that you had the Ebola breaking out in 3 different locations within Africa, and off the top, I think it was Sierra Leone, and I kind of, actually off the top of my head, kept off memory, but I'll dig up the notes and from what I wrote back then. But the point was that the Ebola broke out 3 separate locations virtually simultaneously. There were at least 2 different strains. The Ebola showed a lot of examples of basically having a chimera quality, and it performed in a way which Ebola hadn't normally previously done again beforehand, all of which, and then they were saying that it was this thing about the Ebola linked to bats. What most people don't actually understand about bats is that bats actually are pretty, they like to stay at home, and they don't normally have a range outside of between 30 and 40 k's, and you have cases where you have outbreaks in one spot and then it would break out in another area 3,000 miles away, and yet just like in China, there is no vector crossover. There's no tracking, or that showed up here and then it showed up here and it showed up there. It's just boom, boom, and yet again there's no ground zero. And I said in the case of the situations in Africa, those locations and those universities can be confirmed that they were doing Department of Defense connections. So, when Snopes and fact checks turn around and say, oh, no, there was no connection to Tulane University or the Department of Defense, which again, I'll put the links up there showing you that's what they said so that you can then check it yourself. That's actually fake news. It's completely bullshit. You also have things like, what's not being taken into account was when we're looking at the history of all this sort of stuff about what actually is going on in terms of leakages and occurrence, that nobody's actually looking at the record of all these laboratories. I think, there's a group, I think they call it the community or the cabal or something like that, but it's not in a conspiracy term, but it's how these universities are all interlinked to each other, and no one's actually really looking at the history of these group of different universities about what a terrible track record we have and how they leak like a sieve. And we're not talking like 1 or 2 samples, we're talking hundreds, if not thousands. Um, when we because we get down a little bit further down the video and we start to look at some of the other connections, again, it's sort of I find it quite interesting because some of the organisations which link more into the sort of intelligence community are names which are very familiar to me from previous past history for doing specifically covert intelligence or covert operations. And this is not just normal intelligence analysts where you're being like a spy or your analyst. This is the real down in the dirty group, and these are the groups that we're going to be talking about that had crossovers in the 1990s to things like the Bank of Commerce Credit International, which we now not only know were heavily involved in dark weapons, the involvement of trying to get different nuclear parts for different rogue nations and terrorist groups that were, or NGOs that were wanting these sophisticated weapons. We now know that a lot of those guys actually are also linked to a lot of very major money laundering investigations, which are now coming to the fore in terms of you've got things like Cameron Ortis, who is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Officer analyst, who's recently been busted, and it turns out that this is a guy that's a specialist in transnational crime in Canada, and he'd been leaking information to different cartels and these, very powerful non-state players. None of this is conspiracy theory. This is just called being educated and informed, and it's really frustrating to sit there and watch. I come from a very punk rocker, hippie background, so I always consider myself very much in the left wing camp, and now I'm seeing people that being left wing going, oh, right wing conspiracy theorists. I'm going, what shit, man? I grew up in old Laos and Cambodia and Iran Contra, and there was the left were always the ones that going, oh, there's left wing conspiracy theorists, and they were proved to be right. And now in this new generation where we seem to have completely forgotten about that, and if you actually challenge a corporations or the ethics of intelligence agencies, you sort of looked at sideways, and you're going, well, I'm doing it because these guys have a track record for abuse as long as my arm. So I'm going to get back onto kind of the track of what I'm saying. See, we've got another one here. Was this? Sorry, I turned around and said before, and it was James Ledoc from Galveston was the friend of Shi Zinger. That's actually not the case. That's actually was Peter Zazek, who again is one of these guys actually going out there doing interviews. He's on Twitter. He's been used as a source on things like Fact Checker and Snopes and so on, or pouring scorn on the situation, saying, "Oh, it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing." And it turns out that not only does he actually have direct links himself to the Wuhan University, but he's the one that actually is the friend of Shi Zingli, who's sort of the big cheese in the whole running the whole Wuhan laboratory. And we'll get back to it in a second again, because the other thing about her is that she was actually visiting Galveston University. Dates, links, all that location stuff, all on the page below, source references, so you can check it out to cross-reference itself. If you don't believe me, look at the sources. I try to put as many sources to confirm or corroborate as I possibly can. I try and actually stick to using mainstream news, Washington Post, The Guardian, the BBC. So I'm using all information. So when they say, oh, conspiracy theory, I'm going, well, why, guys? Because I'm using your news. The only difference here is that I actually have a reductive memory, and I remember stuff. And I don't just rely on what's on Google and assume that it's not going to get filtered or scrubbed. I have my own libraries, and I keep an extremely extensive record. So when this stuff comes up, I go and look for my own paperwork and say, oh yeah, I knew that name beforehand. So we've got this case of there with we're just looking at the situation because again we've got this Luc Montagnier, who basically is a French guy who basically kind of cracked the whole AIDS or HIV case. Again, details there. So he's basically Snopes is he's saying, well, actually this is not natural, and Snopes is saying fact checker says the virus was man-made, debunked, nothing to do with HIV. And then they started to kind of make a little bit of a smear attempt on him. So always get some rather strange release, whatever. They acknowledged the strain, but they said they were just random chances. Well, again, it's this single saying that doesn't have any resemblance to HIV and that there's no unique qualities about it. This is an absolute pile of bullshit. You only spend a bit of time actually looking at scholarly articles, and again, we'll list some of these cases here to counter that Snopes complaint. They're just saying shit that's not true. Media looking at this stuff, or people that deem Snopes and Fact Checker to be credible sources without looking actually who's financing them. when actual fact is when you go and fact check the fact checkers, they're full of shit. I'm trying to think of the case I'm actually looking at because they've got Gary Roberts there. I'm not actually looking for the case I'm looking for is Daniel, and I think it's Daniel Anderson again. I'll highlight that in the links below. But again, here's one of these people that's been mentioned on an interview. She's been interviewed. She's been put on. She has been one of the fact checkers saying no, all these Wuhan laboratory collections are all nonsense and there's no truth in them. And yet we find out that there's actually 9 collaborations with her with one of the key guys who at Wuhan laboratory. And again, it's you sort of start to look at this kind of case comes up. Let's go quick. I'm just trying to give you this. I don't want to bore you to death with details and go on. So I just want to give you kind of the nutshell stuff. Yeah, so again, you've got all these guys. You've got a guy at Taiwan University, and he says not man-made, and then looks like a bit of pressure gets put upon him, and then it turns out the sources say, oh, this is this debunked Indian reference, which they pulled afterwards. Again, junior academics, and this guy's a junior academic, and then it turns out that the senior academic at Taiwan University, which this guy is Chen Li, turns around and says, well, it's called nonsense, guy. Oh, it's got no unique circumstance. Oh, it could happen randomly in nature. Oh no, there's no similarities to HIV, which is all absolute shit, And basically, what we'll I'll get to the conclusions in a second, but what we're finding is this is with the laboratory situation, but this same phenomena of specific academics in the media getting sound bites and viewpoints and being deemed as sources, and the media just simply not checking them, is actually going to prove quite interesting because in England we had the case of Neil Ferguson from Imperial College London, and what I pointed actually out to begin with was I said, well, first of all, he came up with that report on March 13th, basically around about March 16th, and in that report he said that 2.5, I think it was, just got to get my sources correct here. He said 2.5 million people would die in the United Kingdom because of the projection figures that this guy was actually coming up with. On March 16th, he read that basically that was sort of severely looked at sideways by the rest of the academic community, and he sort of backed down and said, "Oh well, actually no, that's 250,000 people will die, even with controls." So that means if we put in the isolation, we put in the all the measures that we've actually done, minimally 250 people in the United Kingdom will actually die of the coronavirus. On March 17th, he not only did he turn around and repeat that statement, which is on the March 16th amendment, having already filed on March 13th, made a second amendment to the report. So on March 17th, in the Imperial College's own website and newsletter, said this, yes, 250 with controls, even with controls, gave a graph. The graph makes it clear, 250 with beds. You can see it very, very, very clearly. And then then something goes interesting because there basically looks like there's another amendment to the report, because what you find very interesting when you actually dig in and find the report in the Imperial College, and you really have to do a deep dive. It's not like go to the website, it's there. You got to go there and find there, and it takes you fucking ages to get it. But when you actually get in there, what you find is that the graph's really interesting because it looks down the side, left and the right, that yes, it looks like there's this new figure that emerges, and I'll get to that in a second, saying 20,000, with controls. But that sort of looks like that's nothing. The graph doesn't, the figures, the 100,000s and the sides the legends don't actually match up with that new figure of 20,000, which you think, well, that's okay, a bit odd. But then you start to read into the report, and it says in the text of the report, 250 with controls. And there's no reference to this new figure of 20,000. And I'll tell you about this new figure about 20,000. So on the 17th, he basically says this, and on the 19th in the Standard and the Telegraph, that same figure is repeated, 250,000, even with controls. He then says, oh, sorry guys, I can't talk to you because I'm having to go into lockdown because I've been infected with the coronavirus. We now find out that actually while he was in lockdown, the guy was telling him, "Oh, if you don't stay at home, you don't stay at home. You know, you're gonna spread the disease. It's really important to save lives. You must stay at home." And he was going around and bonking some guy's wife, you know, some other person he was in affair with, going around and screwing her on the side. So one rule for you, one rule for me. Just like our Minister of Health was tweeting, "Stay at home, save lives," while he was going off and doing mountain biking, going for little drives, and that was, you know, going. Everyone's going, "Oh no, but it wasn't such a big deal." The government is one level. I mean, the double sounds amazing. One level saying, "Oh, these terrible people that say, oh, if we don't stay locked down, they're just terribly irresponsible." And yet, when the Minister of Health does it, they're like, "Oh no, that well, you know, it wasn't that bad. We should give them a break." Well, which is it, guys? Because you're not being consistent here. But the point is, this guy Neil Ferguson turned around. This is what is going on the 27th in the UK papers and the papers like I think it was specifically the Guardian, and a lot of this stuff with the coronavirus originally. And a lot of the funding behind that is the Bill Gates Foundation, and you've got similar reports been coming out of the Washington Post, which is the Amazon or Amazon. So again, all these people taking these, you know, really reputable standard newspapers, but they're not actually looking at who the funding is or all the articles that actually have been out there quite some time talking about the issue of these big pharmaceutical companies actually shaping the altar of editorial because of this largesse which they're actually giving to it. And apparently that doesn't actually, you know, doesn't matter anymore. Oh, yeah, no, don't worry about the money. We won't think that actually shapes the editorial. Well, it fucking does. So on the 27th, the UK paper started to put this new figure in, 20,000K, even with controls. Oh, no. Those high figures were only if we didn't put the controls down. And on the 30th, the New Zealand papers, again, were reported with the situation. Now, the New Zealand papers, now, again, getting back to that 27th and the 30th situation, what we now find is there is no actual factual reference for that. That is a made-up figure, which was never in the original reports. You actually go to the primary document, the document that the guy who wrote the report himself wrote. That 20,000K figure does not exist in the report. Okay, and then what you find out is in New Zealand, we were told, oh yes, well, you know, if we don't put people into lockdown, 60,000 people will die. We do, 10,000 will die. Not even fucking close. So when goes, oh, you know, people complain now because people didn't die. We're not complaining because people didn't die. We're complaining because you made a decision which affected the entire economy and everyone's life. And it's not just it affected people's economy. It's not about people's making money. It's about you shut down the economy so that the government is able to get revenue. It no longer can afford to fund hospitals. It can no longer afford to fund surgery. It can no longer afford mental health programs. So what you're actually doing is you are not saving lives. You're actually costing lives because the damage done versus the number of lives saved is shit triage. Now, triage is what you do when you're trying to work out who to save and who not to save. So, you know, this model that we have in New Zealand was based on the London report, which again is very interesting because what actually happened in New Zealand was that how this is all now emerging and how we're finding this out is that last Friday they dumped a cache of various primary documents. Now, these are the documents that journalists should be going to, reading and actually knowing the facts before they go and accept a press release from the government or accept what their boss from the editorial of a large corporate newspaper is telling them. This is basic journalism 101. It's also very interesting, though, however, because what's actually happening is that those documents were released at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon, which is the maximum time that, you know, it's real. There used to be a comedy in the UK called Yes Minister, and it was a basically satire about all the tricks that politicians and bureaucrats would pull. And this is a real Yes Minister moment, releasing documents at 5 o'clock in the afternoon when the journalists are all going home for the day, so that no one's actually going to read it, so that it's not going to appear in the weekend papers when people actually read, and it won't appear until Monday. There's actually a double whammy in this too, because what they're actually doing really cleverly is that what's actually happening, of course, is that they know that the opposition party will go and get these primary documents. And so, for example, Cameron Slater, who's the guy that does the whale law document, I can barely say the guy's name. He's so politically opposed to everything I believe. But he started this mentioning the situation of the primary documents of Neil Ferguson appearing in New Zealand as an advisor to the policies that we base ourselves for the decision to lockdown. Now, I've said this beforehand, well before Cameron Slater, and you can go and check actually my website. You know, he said this 2-3 days ago. I've said this like nearly 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm not he's not saying anything new. It's just that he actually happens to have a bit more clout because he's a bit more funded by the opposition party. Now, the problem is that Cameron Slater, because he's so right-wing, when he turns around and says, of course, all the right-wing people say, oh, see, it's terrible, and they go out and say this, but then the left-wing part voters don't go around and go, shit, we've just been lied to. We've just been given some really shit information in a really sleazy manner. What they actually hear is Cameron Slater telling it, and so their cognitive dissonance kicks in because that's on a viewpoint affiliated with what they want to believe. And so that hardcore factual information gets rejected out of hand because it came from the wrong voice. And that's the cleverness of a spin at work here. Now, let's get a little bit back to the Wuhan laboratory. Now, what we're also looking at in the Wuhan laboratory, and I'm going to remember this point I'm going to get through to you guys, is that, in fact, let's stop it there, and next time around we're going to look at you, we've turned around to you, and we've, to sum it at the stages, we've turned around to you and we've looked at the fact that, number one, the proven fact, it is not up for debate, there is no etymology to show that the actual coronavirus originated from the seafood market in Wuhan. That's George Webb, who's an investigative journalist, and I would put him in the centre right. It's not, I'm okay with George, he's not like Cameron Slater, but he's probably a little like Americans say to me, you know, you're on one side or the other. But, you know, he makes a very point. He calls it the lone fishmonger. So I'll credit George Webb for that term. But this is what we're dealing with. There is no lone fishmonger at Wuhan. Totally discredit it. Absolutely. Anyone that turns around and starts to talk about, oh, it came from the seafood market. There is no factuality to that theory any more than the issue of the theory that the virus came from the Wuhan laboratory. We'll get into that in the situation saying what information or circumstances makes that a stronger case than the seafood one in a second. But what I would want to basically point out to you in with this is that, of course, is the issue that the people that have been turning around and saying that, oh, no, this whole came from a laboratory situation, oh, that's all nonsense, it's all right-wing rhetoric. No, it's not. It's actually, no, it's not. The people that are saying that are stating something, things in their debunking cases that are factually, very easily, provably not correct. And when you turn around and you look at what their work histories are, you find that actually what you've got is a case of the people that have been alleged to have a connection, you know, that saying, well, Wuhan's got this connection to a possible laboratory in Wuhan, or came out of the laboratory, and the people that are saying, oh, no, that's true. Turns out these are the same people that are actually, we should be actually, you know, putting under the microscope, because the laboratories in which they come from is things like Galveston, big alarm, Winnipeg, big alarm. They come from Harvard, big alarm, and then they come from, in the case of, they also got a case of, you know, connections with Geelong, because we also find when we look at Geelong, we've got a situation of, in Geelong, just like in Harvard, we've got basically stuff that was actually being under investigation because it was being, actually stuff was going missing, and not just a few cases, a lot. And the suspects were people that came out of China. Now, I'm not going to say that's the Chinese government, because we'll save that whole issue for another situation, but they came out of China, and it turns out that, of course, in the case of Shi Lin, who's the Chinese woman that Peter Jackarek, who's one of the debunkers, turns out to be a friend, well, not only is she visiting Galveston, where it turns out that, yes, she's going to this conference, which the conference does not exist. So, well, what were you doing there? But it turns out she was also at Geelong at the same time when they started having, you know, that Geelong was under investigation. And at the same time, what was going on in Geelong was that we have a Chinese, actually, I'm going to take that back. We have a scientist of Asian descent. I've never quite managed to work out where that particular scientist actually originated from, but that's not the point. He died in that because of a laboratory accident, which is again showing you the fact, this idea, when you turn around and start to look at the number of accidents, going, well, why couldn't it have come from laboratory? These things have a terrible fucking history. You know, there's a really good report out there called the Sunshine Report, which looks into all of these accidents that occurred in the United States, even before we bring the subject of espionage into it. And, of course, then you get into things like the 1970s. So you've got things like the swine flu, the Cuban swine flu, in fact, which connects to USAID, and the CIA was put there man-made. We find that the Ebola that was actually put there in Sierra in the 1970s, connect to South Africans, which we now later on turn around and find are actually working in places like Fort Detrick's. Again, under investigation. And, of course, Fort Detrick's, and this is the point that I'm going to start this in the next video to point off with. Fort Detrick's is the place that during 2001, during 9/11, and we're told, oh my God, these terrorists, they also brought anthrax into the country, and we've got Dick Cheney holding up little vials of of supposedly what's meant to be anthrax, which has come from Mahabharata. And we'll get into that. We'll get into that story properly next video. So we've got them holding up these videos as well. And when it turns out that actually it traces right back to Fort Detrick's. So basic Occam's razor, and I'll leave you with this. The thing that frustrates me the most when the journalists are looking at this is that if they bother to do their homework and find out the fact that, well, actually, no, there is no lone fishmonger, you have this situation going, well, which is the more probable story in terms of Occam's razor? And Occam's razor is when faced with two options of uncertainty, normally the one that is the most simplest actually is the most probable one, and the one that we should be investigated with a bit more earnest energy than another one. So we have, in the case of the fishmonger, one option, which is the one that's the dominant narrative driven by the mainstream corporate media, of this virus coming about, which basically comes from one location somewhere in China where we're connected to a bat, where somewhere else where it comes from one of these things like a Patagonia, and then these things somehow kind of get together, and then they manage to get picked up by some hunter or person bringing food to the market, who travels from that location, which is 600 miles, to Wuhan, and along the way there's absolutely no other examples, no cases, and there's no ground zero subjects. It's the same ridiculous story being told with Ebola in Africa. So do we believe that scenario with nothing to back it up? And in cases, we've now got cases of diseases actually emerging, and I'll get into that one a little bit later on as well, of diseases emerging not just in China, but we now know that they also occurred in France in late December. Well, the incubation period means that was coming in at least early December or late November, and we have possible cases in the United States, which again incubation, which makes it down to October. Or do we actually go, actually, it came from either a laboratory or in Wuhan, or it came from another source outside of Wuhan, possibly one of these other laboratories that have been defended so rigorously by people saying, no, it didn't come from a laboratory, and it turns out when you look at the connections they connected to the Wuhan story, which is, that laboratory is about 5 miles away from Wuhan itself. So do we go, well, maybe it actually did get out of the laboratory in Wuhan, or was brought into the country in Wuhan earlier beforehand, and we'll get into the different scenarios there beforehand, because in that case we do actually have some leads, and we have some interesting factors which then get defended by experts that are in the pay of the people that are in the investigation. What would you say under Occam's razor principle would be the more simple explanation? And I'll leave you to think about that one. And next time we're going to have a look at some of the people and the funding organizations that are linked to some of these interesting laboratories.